Welcome back to Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation, Anime Review, episode number 26. We are discussing it's technically the 5th episode of season 2, but it is the 29th episode of the entire series. Ranoa, the episode is called Ranoa, University of Magic. This episode covers pretty much the entirety of chapters 2 and 3 of book 8. Any major cuts? A couple small interactions, and a little bit of the start of chapter 2. But mostly put, it's a pretty faithful adaptation. They do move one line into a later scene, and they do change one scene a little bit. Yeah, one scene is changed. And I think this is a slip up on the part of the writer of Subbers with another scene, which I'll get to that. So we start off with Rudius and Elsie when they arrive at the academy. And of course, they're basically brought to they referred to him as the vice principal in the last episode. Here it's basically, it's, where is he? Jonas Hafis. Yes, for some reason, they mention he's a teacher, but he's a vice principal, so they be with him. And of course, basically, he has to ask before he comes in, what are you doing here? Like, you can say magic? Sure. Well, I was looking for young boys. And of course, basically, Rudy has to introduce himself, and then we see, he's going to basically roll. Of course, there's also smirk in here, where he does mention Roxy's name, which he's like, that's Miss Roxy, you punk. Which, yeah, he says in the anime too, which, good on, basically, they kept that in. And after this conversation, they proceed to walk straight to another room. Well, basically, a little bit on some buildings here, lots of students. There's also mentioned the reason why he's here, which this is faithful to the book itself, where he's here to do research on mass teleportation and looking for a cure for somebody, namely himself. He doesn't say himself, but yeah, he's got basically a rock problem with his groin. He's going to fix that here. And then he's basically brought to this room where they do duels. This dueling room. And basically he proceeds to have a test. What kind of test? Basically a mock duel between him and Silent Fitz. Now, in the book, basically, he asks somebody to borrow Fitz. In the anime, this is already prearranged. And the thing itself, basically, it's shown, looks like, though, you see from part of the anime, the way the anime presents it, it seems like Saphantite immediately recognizes Rudius. Yeah, it seems like she immediately recognizes him because this is probably the first time she's seen him in years. And she immediately recognizes, oh, by the way, Rudius basically has got a ponytail now, a very small ponytail. So, they have a brief mock duel, which of course it proceeds exactly the way we present in the book, where they do some spells. Of course, Saphantite brings out one which Rudius does immediately recognize. Now, this one he gave the Saphantite when he was basically a teacher of magic, when they were much younger. Now, I know this because I've watched the anime and read the books. And I think he does recognize the one, but he's not immediately recognized Fitz himself. Well, herself. They do kind of spoil that a little bit in the episode. So, then we have basically using little rocks at her. Well, it is Saphantite. And of course, basically, it's like I mentioned, the surf magic. And he passes the fact he owes Fitz debt. And, he does the kind of Fitz, twice, 3 times over the course of the entire episode. Because right after this, we see Rudius. Now, if you've even seen the promotional images they have for the season, he's wearing this particular very white garb. Let's see if I add some cover on the books here. I thought it was in the cover, but nope, it wasn't. So, yeah, he puts on the white outfit he wears from the you see from teaser images, and then you see him basically just okay, puts in the outfit, goes to class, where he runs into Zenobia. First time I've seen him since toward the end of season 1. Of course, you recognize now that there's a line here they moved to a later scene, which I'll get to, and then of course you introduce the classmates, We introduced him to Lena and Persina. They even mentioned about Silent Fist not being there. Now, here's something, basically. I think this was a screw up, probably either on the subbers or the studio who made the series. They referred to Fitz as a girl, despite the fact everybody else basically refers to Fitz as a guy. Despite the fact Fitz is a girl. Sephentai. Yeah, I thought that was kind of weird, the fact that they brought this up. Now, there's also a class, basically, prog on this, and of course, then Rudius introduced himself to Cliff, which this scene, the whole interaction between these two of them, is spot on from the book. Of course, they bring up the fact, they reference, like, in terms of the end, they reference the last season's OVA, which aired last year, Eris the Goblin Slayer. They reference that one. And this is Rudy's first meeting with Cliff, a character who become basically a regular character in the books. Yeah, a character. Yeah, this is his first meeting with him, though technically he first shows up in a short story in, I think it was book 6 was first introduced. And he's brought in here, and he's basically here as a regular character from this point forward. Pretty much up into the recent book. His storyline has mostly been wrapped up. Now, in the books, he does meet somebody and gets married to her. Yes, he gets married. Who? Not going to spoil that because that happens after what happens with Rudius. So, right after this class, then he proceeds to, well, have a meets up with Luke, Nurse Garrett. Now, they do cut the line out here of possibly him being Paul's illegitimate child. That was kind of silly from the book, and, well, the anime is supposed to realize that, so they cut it out from the scene. This is also the moment where Zenobia requests him not to refer to him as Your Majesty, but Zenobia. And I thought this was probably, in my opinion, this was a smart move on the part of moving this particular line here, because this is set up in a different scene. And good on that part. I think this is a brilliant idea, because it seemed kind of weird. We have this here in one scene, and having a proper conversation later about it basically is a much better way to handle this scene. Good on Ixu to do that. As for the interaction with Luke and Rudius, it's pretty much exactly how I was expecting the book, except there's a whole bunch about dates, basically. They cut out the girls who are with him, they pretty much cut their dialogue out, which I'm fine with that. It's perfectly fine. I don't think anybody's issue with that. Then we also have a couple times we go to the library in the episode. The first time he goes to the magical library, which was Forbidden Library. Of course, there's a scene they cut out here, which, yeah, this would have been kind of silly to bring keeping the anime of him running to basically a hall monitor, asking why he's not in class, to say he's a special student, he's not required to go to class. He throws his ID and moves on. My opinion, good on part of the anime cut this up. I guess this was stupid. We don't really need to have this scene here. Just basically move on to the library. He checks off books, and he runs to Fitz again here. The scene itself is shockingly unaltered, which I'm sure the animators must have really stuck really close, because I'm sure that they must have got some flack for book 5, how it was basically handled, because they skipped a whole chapter last season. That in some ways they never finished adapting book 5. I mean, in the case of book 7, with the exception of Sarah's point of view, it was a faithful adaptation of the book. Excuse me. In the case of this particular one so far, we are 2 episodes into the adaptation of book 8. And so far at this point in time, it's pretty faithfully adapted. Which I'm like, wow. Oh, and by the way, the whole duel thing, when that ended in the episode, that was the end of chapter 2 of the book. Yeah, that whole scene was from the ending of chapter 2, and the rest of the episode was from chapter 3. And of course, we have Fitz basically mentioned about book, and might return again, which they will many times before he finds out who Fitz really is. Then, of course, basically he walks home at the second library, like, need to bring a book, and then something falls from the sky. What is it? A pair of panties. And of course, he yells at the window like who it possibly belonged to. He just trying to politely return it, and he's accused me of panty thief. Yes, a panty thief. And then all of a sudden a gorilla pops up, tries to threaten and basically punish him for dealing to steal the panties of Princess Ariel. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, her first scene in the episode They kind of really introduced her as a new member of student council, while in the episode they introduced her as the student council president. Which on her right is Luke, and on the left is Fitz. Of course, Rudy is to stare at Fitz for a bit, probably because maybe he's starting to recognize her, who she is. Well, this is probably, in a way, this is the anime's hint of the setup for Rudy is finding out that Fitz is Savantite. Yes, this is so obvious, and I'm fine with this. Like, this is perfectly fine if you watch the OVA that started the season off. Then pretty much basically like everybody's around. Of course, the girl nearly breaks his freaking forearm, and of course now this is a slight, tiny bit of alteration from the book, because in the book Fitz is referred to by the gorilla woman as Lord Fitz. In the anime, she refers to her as Master Silent Fitz. Yes, and she's silent but yet she speaks. How does that make any sense? Yeah, so she apologizes, and of course she admits that, yeah, those are his panties, but basically this is a complete accident. He was just trying to return them. And eventually it's like he's forced to let go, and then we see her when she heals up Rudy's arm. He kind of stares at her. Of course, he takes out her wand again in the episode, threatening her. And of course, he heals Rudy's arm, and of course say they'll see each other again. Don't worry. In the case of Savantite, this is sort of basically hinted at. Also, there's this weird camera shot in the episode where when he meets up with the two doll-fied girls, first one, for some reason, the camera decides to have a close-up of her groin. I do not know why they have a close-up of that. I thought that was kind of a weird thing to have in the episode. I mean, it just seems so odd, the fact they did this. I'm like, was this very necessary? No, it wasn't. It was not necessary at all to do this. But I had to bring this up. But this was so... It's almost like the person who directed this episode, it's like the person who did that shot must have been a pervert. Because that, or the fact they really wanted to show up the sexy legs of this character, even though this close-up, it's pretty much in her groin area. Yes. You could have, I don't know, focused on her face. Nope, we had to focus on her groin for some reason. And you might be thinking, this is going to go anywhere? Well, it kind of does with these two. There is a scene later on in this particular book that I'm kind of hoping gets adapted because the scene is so hilarious. Because of the fact he did this in the book. In the manga, this happened too, which good in the manga keeping this in. And I pray to God the anime keeps this scene in. You'll find out when they get to it. And it's in book 8. Yes, it is in book 8. So I'm really hoping they adapt it for this season. Yep. So in the case of basically what's up for the first core of the season, which is rumored to be 11 episodes, we're basically about halfway through. We have 6 more episodes left to go. Now, how many more episodes do I think that will take up in the case of book 8? Well, we have already had 2 episodes cover just so far, the prelude and the first 3 chapters. Now, do I think they might adapt the Savantite side story? Not really sure about that. They might skip that for a later episode. It is possible, but who knows? If I would take a guess in the case of... I would probably say this particular book will be wrapped up in about 2 or 3 episodes. So this wrap up either by the 7th episode season or the 8th one. But it all depends on... It all depends upon basically the studio who makes it. Yes. But yeah, that's particularly a particular view. Next episode is going to be Comic Corner. It's on to Eden Zero next. Okay? Bye.